Good day, everybody. I hope that you are well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 8 English lesson on verbs, right? And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts, grade 8, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of verbs. So this is a continuation of our previous lesson on verbs. In our previous lesson, we spoke about irregular past tense verbs, right? Where we said that we have regular and irregular verbs. Regular verbs are verbs that where we follow a specific rule, and we say that either we add D or we add ED in order to show the past tense of that verb, right? That is regular verbs. And with the irregular verbs, right, it does not follow any specific rule, right? So you're just going to have to know the specific form. Then we went over simple, present, and future tense. So simple past, present, and future tense. And then we also had to form the progressive verb tenses. But today, we are going to continue with the chapter of verbs. The subject is English Language Arts, grade 8. And the lessons that we are going to be focusing on is to form the perfect verb tenses, to identify transitive and intransitive verbs, and to identify linking verbs. All right. So when it comes to forming perfect verb tenses, right? Then the perfect tense, it usually describes a complete action, right? So it describes a complete action. All right. So once again, the perfect verb tense it usually describes complete actions. It tells about something that has, had, or will have happened. And to form the perfect tense, right, we need to use the form of the helping verb to have with the past participle in the main verb. All right. So the past participle, right, of a verb, it is usually the same as the past tense form, but sometimes it is irregular, right? Remember when we say when something is irregular, then it means that it does not, let's say, follow specific rules. And then we have the present perfect tense, right? And the present perfect tense, it tells us about something that has happened or has started already. And it uses the present tense form of the helping verb to have, which is either has or have. All right. And an example of the present perfect tense, it says, the sun has. Remember, we're either using the helping verb has or have. So we can say the sun has broken through the clouds. So the sun has broken through the clouds. And if you look at another example, right, then we can say, John and Erica have played the violin for 5 years. So with the present perfect tense, right, it tells about something that has happened or has started already, and it uses the present tense form of the helping verb either has or have, right? The sun has broken through the clouds, or we can say John and Erica have played the violin for 5 years. So that is the present perfect tense. And then we have the past perfect tense, right? And the past perfect tense, it tells about something that had happened before something else. And it uses the past tense form of the helping verb, which is had. So if we look at an example, right, it says we had finished dinner by the time Tim arrived, meaning we are done, right? Tim came afterwards. And then we can go to the future perfect tense, right? And the future perfect tense, it tells about something that will have happened by a certain point in the future. And remember, whenever we use future tense, we also use the word will. So it can either be will have or just will be, but will, right? And when it comes to the future perfect tense, right, then it uses the future tense form of the helping verb will have. And if we look at an example, right, it says the race will have started by noon. So when it will have started by noon tomorrow, right? So it tells us that something will have happened by a certain point in the future, tomorrow. All right. So when it comes to transitive and intransitive verbs, right, that is also to do with verbs. So we have transitive verbs and we have intransitive verbs. And action verbs, right, can be either transitive or it can be intransitive. So we now basically going to find out what is transitive and what is intransitive, right? So when it comes to transitive verbs, when an action verb is transitive, it is followed by a direct object, right? A direct object. And a direct object is a pronoun. It can be a noun or it can be a noun phrase that receives the action of a verb, right? It receives the action of the verb. For example, to find the direct object, right, we can ask ourselves what or whom the verb is acting on. For example, Joan walked her dog. Joan walked her dog. So if we ask ourselves, what did Joan walk or whom did Joan walk, then we can say her dog, right? So her dog is then what or whom the verb is acting on. So which means that if we specifically look at the transitive verb, then we can say walked is our transitive verb, right? And walked is our transitive verb because it has a direct object, which is her dog, and it shows what or whom Joan walked. All right. And when an action verb is intransitive, right? Remember we said when an action verb is transitive, right? It is followed by a direct object, right? That either tells us what or whom the action or the verb is acting on. But now when an action verb is intransitive, then it does not have a direct object, right? For example, Joan walked around the block, right? So we said walked is an intransitive verb, right? But it doesn't have a direct object. It doesn't tell us whom or what the verb is acting on, right? So there's no direct object to answer the question what or to answer the question whom. All right, so now we're going to go to aplusstudents.ca. And then we're going to do our tutorial lesson as well as our test, right? So we're going to form the perfect verb tense, right? And we said with perfect verb tense, it usually describes completed action, right? And it tells us something that has, had, or will have happened to form the perfect verb tense, right? And then we can also use the helping verbs, right? So in order to form the helping verbs to have in the past participle in the main verb, the past participle in the main of the verb is usually the same as the past tense form, but sometimes it is irregular, right? So we said in the present perfect tense, tells about something that has happened and has started already, and we use the helping verb either has or have. Then we have the past tense that tells us something that had happened before something else, and we use the past tense form of that helping verb had. And with the future perfect tense, it tells us about something that will have happened by a certain point in the future, and it uses the future tense form of the helping verb will have. Right? So now we're going to our test. All right. It says complete the sentence with the present perfect form of the verb. It says the network administrators, right? Do we say have enhanced or do we say enhances? This is not the present perfect tense, right? So do we say the network administrators have enhanced, or do we say enhance the security by configuring all passwords by the system still seems vulnerable to hackers? So the network administrators, do we say have enhanced, or do we say enhance the security by configuring all passwords, but the system still seems vulnerable to hackers? What do you think is our present perfect form of the verb? Is it have enhanced, option one, or option two, which is enhances? All right, so we can then say the network administrators have enhanced securities by configuring all passwords, right? Then the second one says, by the end of the night, Lacey, do we say will have completed? This is now the future perfect tense, right? Do we say by the end of the night, Lacey will have completed, or do we say Lacey completed her article about how the debate over the removal of vending machines from public schools has increased awareness of the dangers of foods high in sugar and fat? All right. And if we were to choose the correct one, we will say that by the end of the night, Lacey will have completed. Because remember, it is the future perfect tense, right? And it uses the helping verbs will have. All right. Superintendent Stephenson hopes that she, do we say finalize a speech about the district's new curriculum guidelines before she leaves the office today? Or do we say Superintendent Stephenson's hope that she will have finalized the district's new curriculum guidelines before she leaves the office today? And remember, we are now completing the sentence with the future perfect tense. All right, so we say Superintendent Stephenson will have finalized her speech about the district's new curriculum guidelines. Remember, because that is the present perfect tense, and with the present perfect tense, we use the helping verb, which is will have. Now we need to complete the sentence with the present perfect form of the verb. Present perfect form of the verb. It says the Hensons. Do we say the Hensons remodel, or do we say the Hensons have remodeled? Remember, we're using the helping verb also. With the present tense, present perfect tense, we use the helping verb has or have. And in this case, we say the Hensons remodel, or do we say the Hensons have remodeled their home before, but the overhaul of the master bedroom will be their first attempt to complete a project without a contractor. So, what is our present perfect form of the verb? Is it remodel or is it have remodeled? All right, then if we were to choose the correct one, we would say have remodeled. All right, so now we're going to identify transitive and we're going to identify intransitive verbs, right? So we said action verbs can either be transitive or action verbs can be intransitive, right? And we said when an action verb is transitive, right? Then it means that it follows by a direct object. It either tells us what or whom the verb is acting on, right? So a direct object is a pronoun, noun, or it can be a noun phrase that receives the action of the verb, right? And in order for us to find the direct object, we can either ask ourselves what the verb is acting on or whom the verb is acting on, right? So it is followed by direct object. It tells us either what or whom the verb is acting on. Sorry. Sorry. For example, Joan walked her dog, right? So our action verb, right, is of course walked, or our verb is walked. And our verb is transitive, right, because it has a direct object, and the direct object is her dog. Because now you're asking yourself, who or what did Joan walk, right? Then we can say Joan walked her dog. So her dog is the direct object, right? Which means that this is a transitive verb, and there we have walked as our action verb. And then when an action is intransitive, it does not have a direct object, right? If we say Joan walked around the block, it doesn't tell us who or what Joan walked, right? Because there's nothing. It just shows that Joan walked around the block. And the verb over here is intransitive because it does not have a direct object, right? All right. So now we're going to, before we go to our test, right? It says, when an action verb is followed immediately by a prepositional phrase, right? Then we say that it is always intransitive. The noun, pronoun, or noun phrase in a prepositional phrase is never a direct object, right? It never tells us who or what it is acting on. Then we have linking verbs are always intransitive. The noun, pronoun, or noun phrase that follows a linking verb describes or renames the subject. So, which means that it does not tell whom or what the verb is acting on. And if we look at a few examples thereof, then we can say Joan was a nurse for 25 years before her retirement, right? And the verb was is the linking verb. So Joan was the linking verb. And the noun phrase, which is a nurse, it renames Joan, right? So Joan was a nurse. So Joan the nurse. All right, so now we're going to our test. So we're going to our test where we're going to either identify transitive or intransitive verbs, right? One of the most destructive earthquakes in recent history occurred in Kashmir and Pakistan on October 8th, 2005. So one of the most destructive earthquakes in recent history occurred in Kashmir and Pakistan in October 8th, 2005. So we need to identify the action verb or its direct object. Is it occurred or is it destructive? Occurred or destructive? All right, so if we were to choose our action verb or direct object, we will say occurred, right? We need to once again select the action verb or the direct object within the sentence. It says, the 1964 disappearance of three civil rights workers in Mississippi ignited a national discussion about race relations in the United States. So we either need to identify the action verb or its direct object. So either option one, a national discussion about race relations, or disappearance of three civil rights. All right. The national discussion about race relations, that is our optional answer. The winter solstice occurs on December 21 or 22 in the northern hemisphere and on June 20 or 21 in the southern hemisphere. So our winter solstice occurs on December 21 or 22 in the northern hemisphere and on June 20 or 21. All right, then they say the next one is the recovery of the sunken is Central America yielding rare 19th century coins. So the recovery of the sunskin is Central America yielding rare 19th century coins. Oh, it's yielded rare. All right. Let's quickly, it's either rare. It's a rare because it's yielded rare. So that is actually our direct object. During World War II, Anne Frank and her family hid for 2 years in the back of an office building on Amsterdam's Prinsengracht Canal. So during World War II, Anne Frank and her family hid for 2 years in the back of an office building on Amsterdam Prinsengracht Canal. So hid is our action verb, right? Now we're just going to identify linking verbs before we end of our lesson. And remember we said linking verbs, right, is a verb that connects either a subject of an adjective or a noun in the predicate, right? And a linking verb does not show action. It does not show action. For example, Washington, D.C. is home to the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. So here it says Washington, D.C. is home to the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, a predicate. So we basically say that the predicate adjective describes the subject. Then if you look at another example, it says a dark chocolate cake that Julie baked tasted incredibly rich. And then we can say within that sentence that a predicate noun identifies or renames the subject. And the most common linking verbs, right, are forms of the verb to be. It's forms of the verb to be. And other linking verbs include appear, become, feel, grow, look, remain, seem, sound, stay, and taste, right? And then also some of the verbs can be used as either linking verbs or some of the verbs can be used as action verb, right? For example, Jenna grew tired as the evening wore on, which means that grew is a linking verb and it connects the subject, which is Jenna, to the predicate, with predicate adjective that describes it. And then also Jenna grew tomatoes in a garden last year. Then we say, yeah, grew is an action verb. And you can tell it's not a linking verb because it shows action. And because of the noun in the predicate doesn't identify or rename the subject. All right. So we're going to our test. So we're going to select the linking verb, During those dog days of summer, the air-conditioned library became our favorite refuge for relentless heat. So we need to select the linking verb. During those dog days of summer, the air-conditioned library became our favorite refuge from the relentless heat. So we need to select our linking verb. Is it became or is it refuge? All right, let's try this one. I and became is our linking verb. The Arctic explorer were lost in the blinding snow despite their high-tech GPS devices. So we need to select our linking verb, right? If we were to select the linking verb, we would say it is were. All right, so this is now the end of our lesson on verbs. Remember, there's different types of verbs. We don't just have verbs that we can say is just a doing verb, right? Nowadays, there are different kinds of verb. We have irregular past tense verb, we had simple past tense, present tense, future tense verbs. Then we went over progressive tense verbs, right? And then today we specifically focus on perfect verb tenses, right? Whether it is in the present, past, or in the future. And we went over transitive and intransitive verbs. Remember, transitive has a direct object, which tells us either whom or what it is acting on. And intransitive verbs does not have a direct object, right? And then we also had to identify linking verbs. So there's many different kinds of verbs, right? All right, so this is the end of our lesson on verbs. Thank you very much for joining the class. I really hope that you're going to have a good evening further. Goodbye.